I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're talking about an amazing book. It is called Invisible Influence. It is written by Larry Moran, and it takes us on a thrilling journey with Spencer Graves, an ordinary civil servant whose world is turned upside down after an ill-fated affair in Paris leads him into a web of international conspiracy, economic sabotage, and political intrigue that forces him to confront the darkest depths of human nature and global power. We're delighted to have Larry in the spotlight today. Thank the folks at Authors Tranquility Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Larry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great story. It's kind of a classic noir thriller, political intrigue tale with a really unique character, Spencer Graves. Tell us about Spencer Graves. I think I'd like to play Spencer Graves in a movie. That would be fun.
It would be. Spencer is just an ordinary man who's going through some very difficult times. His wife has left him. He has custody of his kids, but he's really concerned about keeping custody because courts frequently will give the kids to their mother. Mm-hmm. And he goes on a business trip to Paris. It's a government-sponsored business trip, and he has an affair with a French woman. Nothing illegal about that, by the way.
Thank God.
He misses several conference meetings, and when he comes home, that affair is used to blackmail him, first into just giving information out, and then secondly, to giving that information out a little early, and then a little earlier, and eventually he is actually asked to change government statistics. This leads to some changes in stock market prices and eventually into a downturn in the economy.
Wow.
And throughout this whole time, Spencer has to make decisions. Do I stop this right here? Or do I stop this right here and risk losing my kids? Or do I go along? And every time his choices are basically just a small step further, until he realizes what he has done. He's brought the country into a recession. And at that point, he decides, I'm going to have to track these people down. It's not an easy track. One of the things I tried to do in the book was to show that some of our foreign adversaries are really smart people. Mm-hmm. And you can't just see what they're doing and oppose it. And Spencer tries to track these people down. It takes him back to Paris, where he meets again this woman that he had the affair with, but it takes him on another journey, and we find in the end that he was exposable, and the foreign government decides to kill him, the other woman, and several other people, and this is all executed. I won't go into how the story ends, but only to say that all along, Spencer is just an ordinary man trying to do the best that he can for his kids and then eventually his country.
I think that's kind of the classic example of a hero, when you have an ordinary person thrown into extraordinary circumstances, and whether they sink or swim, rise to the top, do the right thing, right?
Right. Though I tried very hard not to make him a superhero. I didn't want him to have these superpowers. And along the way, he has many points when he's sort of questioning his own judgment. Am I ever going to be able to find these people? Can I ever stop this thing? And so I think that really adds a flavor to the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, I worked as a journalist for 9 years, and then I went to work for the federal government. I was a public information officer in a statistical agency. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that happened in the 1980s was, and it continues to happen to this day, but there was some talk about data from our agency being leaked to stock market. And if you had that data, you could make some money. And the director of our agency asked me to sort of track this stuff with the people from Wall Street who were calling and saying, we're getting this data before it's released. So I did, and I happened to be talking to a big-time banker in New York one day, and I was saying to him, these leaks aren't coming from BEA. These leaks must be coming from the White House or from the Treasury Department, but not from us because we couldn't really have any value in it. The man said to me, Larry, if you'll give me the numbers 5 minutes before release, I'll give you $25,000 a month. And of course, he was kidding, I hope. I didn't accept it. I don't have that kind of money. But anyway, I thought, that actually could happen. Yeah. And so I began to work on this story. This was back in the 1980s. I began working on this story. And I was very familiar with economic data back then. I was very much involved. And so I tried to piece together a story. And as I said, I wanted a man who was an ordinary man, not somebody who was a superhero, trying to track these people down. Now, I put the story aside. I was married, had kids and all that stuff. And I brought the story back up in the 2000s. Actually, I retired from the government in 2004. And a couple of years after that, I began to rewrite the story. And this is the version you see now.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, we're glad you picked up the story again and continued writing because it's a great one. Why did you decide to make child custody the weight that's hanging on Spencer's shoulders?
Well, I'm not quite sure why I did it, but let me just say one thing. Everybody knows how much mothers protect their children. Yeah. Sometimes fathers can have those same feelings.
Absolutely.
And in this case, Spencer is the one who wants custody of his children. The mother kind of wants custody, but kind of doesn't. And because her new friend, her new lover, doesn't want to have the children around. But I wanted Spencer to be the one who would have the custody in his heart. And the major reason I guess I chose that was, what other motive, other than say financial motive, could you think that someone would do these things? Right. If your children's safety was at risk, you would do almost anything. One of the things I try to do in the book as well was to show that people can be corrupted little by little by little by little. If Spencer had been asked early on to change economic data, he never would have done it.
Right.
But these people brought him along just step by step by step by step until he was where he didn't want to be. And he had to eventually make a choice. And he did make his choice to go looking for them.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept because if you're confronted with a question of, will I crash the American economy? Will I jeopardize national security? It's easy to say, no, I won't do that. But if you're making little mistakes along the way that's leading up to that, that's how people really, pave that path to hell, I think. It's the small little decisions they make every day. The big decisions are easy.
Right. As a matter of fact, I read history a lot. And if you look back at the 1930s, the German people, had they been told that they were going to be exterminating millions of Jews, right, they never would have supported Hitler. But little by little by little by little, they supported him until they got to that point. And by that time, it was too late.
Yeah.
So this is, this really happens in real life.
Oh, yeah. Beware of incremental change. It can be a game changer for sure. I think we see it even happening today a little bit.
Right.
In the life around us. Tell us a little bit about this as a movie. Have you thought about that at all? It seems like it's got all the makings of a great thriller.
I think it would be a great movie. I haven't really thought a lot about it, though I have to tell you, we've talked to some people about making a script for the movie. So we have taken that step along the way. I sometimes when I picture the book, I can see scenes. I can actually see things where action is happening. Spencer is running away from a car, for example, or he is confronting a Russian diplomat, for example. I can see those scenes in my eye, and I think those would make great scenes in a movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, that great phone call that Spencer gets from a stranger who is revealing intimate details of his life. That would be quite a scene as well.
It would be, yes, it would be. Yeah.
Tell the folks a little bit more at home about that part of the story.
Well, one of the things that I did while I was a public information officer is I spent a lot of time on the telephone answering calls from people in the public, other government agencies as well, but mostly people in the public. And so I provided them with information. A little bit of sidelight, just I found this interesting. In just after 1980, I know it was 81 or 82 in that area. I had a call from a Russian, and he came to the agency where I wanted. He wanted some information. Well, it was public information, so I gave it to him. And he wanted to give me some gifts.
Hmm.
And I decided that wasn't appropriate. I was going to give this information to anybody, and I didn't want to have this image of me giving the Russians information for gifts. And he gave me a bottle of vodka, and he also gave me a coin. I still have it to this day from the 1980 Olympics. Now, it wasn't gold, so it wasn't worth a lot. But at any rate, when I refused both of those items, he went to the Department of Commerce, Secretary of Commerce, and complained.
Amazing.
And the secretary told me that I should accept them because they weren't of great value. So I did. I accepted them, but
Right.
I don't drink, so I gave the vodka to somebody else, and I kept the coin somewhere. I have no idea where it is. But anyway, those are the kinds of calls you get in the middle, in the middle of the day from somebody, and you don't quite know what to do with them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's your inspiration behind it. Yeah, absolutely. I used to work at CBS Newsroom in the early part of my career, and answering the phones was my job because there was no email back then. This was the same era, early 1980s. And the things you would hear and the things people would say were just absolutely incredible. Suppression of cancer cures. You can watch me in my home through the TV. I mean, real people who are wearing obviously aluminum foil hats,
Right.
You deal with the public enough, you learn that there's a big percentage out there who are absolutely cuckoo,
Right.
unfortunately.
Matter of fact, I have another book out called Laughing Through Life, and it's a humorous collection it's a sort of fictional autobiography. And in that, I do talk about real requests for information that I got while I was working in the public information office. You're right. You get some really crazy ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about that book. It's called Laughing Through Life. I love the title.
Yeah, it's Laughing Through Life. It's a fictional autobiography. Most of what is in there really happened.
Right.
But I sort of fictionalized some of it to make it a little more interesting for a general public. I grew up in a family of 10 children.
Wow.
In the middle of Indiana in a small town of 500. And we were really a great family. We all loved each other. All 10 of us are still alive. We all 10 get along. There's never been a conflict between any two siblings. So we get along. And anyway, this book is stories about those people, my siblings. Those people were really just wonderful people. I had, for example, my brother Howard was always interested in science fiction. And once we were walking in the woods near Carmel is a really small town, and he thought he saw a space alien because science fiction was his bag, and he thought he saw a space alien. And I didn't see it because it apparently had moved too quickly. And we went to our dad, and we went to our mom, and we actually went down to the police station to tell them about it. And they all thought we were crazy. Anyway, it turns out that Howard did see something unusual. Somebody had brought back from New Mexico an armadillo, and it gotten loose. And Howard saw this thing, and he said, "Never seen like that. Must be a space monster." And so, based on that sighting of that space monster, we had a interesting experience. But those are the kinds of stories. One of my favorite stories, if I may just digress a little bit, I was on the. Well, let me start by saying I had this crush on this cheerleader. I was 16 years old, and I had this crush on this cheerleader, but she didn't know who I was. I mean, she did, but
Right.
And so I was trying to impress her. One day in Noblesville, there was a skating rink. One day I saw her at the skating rink, and I was trying to impress this. Her name was Donna. Trying to impress Donna. And what do teenage boys do? Faster is better. And I was going around the ring really fast. And eventually I fell down right in front of Donna, and she fell down. And of course, that sort of ended my hopes, unless I could become the star basketball player. This is Indiana, right? In the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. So I went out for the team and made the team, and but I never played. I was really not good. That's just a fact. And so in the sectional tournament at the end of my junior year, um, there were 10 guys on the team for that final game. Two of them were home with the flu. And I sat on the bench throughout the entire game. Two guys fouled out. That left me on the bench. About 2 minutes to go in the game, we were a couple points behind, but we were close. With about 2 minutes to go, the star player, a guy named Larry Isley, fell. He fell on the floor, and they stopped the game, and all the players gathered around him. And eventually, of course, the coach went out to see what the problem was. And eventually he turned around and said, "Moran, come here." I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get to play. I'm going to get to win this game for Donna. I'm going to be a hero. And when I got out there, the coach said, "Hey, Moran, take your pants off." He said, "Isley's ripped the seat out of his pants. He needs your pants." So anyway, I did that, and they covered me up and all that stuff. But the point is, a lot of people would have thought that was a terrible experience. I thought it was funny. And so the book is about stories like that, where you learn to laugh at yourself and at life.
Awesome. Awesome. That's a great story. That's a great story. Trying to impress a cheerleader,
Yeah.
the cutest girl in school or whatever, and you on the hockey team. Now's your big moment. We need you right now, Larry. Sure, coach. What do you need?
Right.
Your pants.
Right.
That's
Anyway,
amazing. The other story reminded me of I did a TV commercial. I used to play a UFO conspiracy theorist who believed that Mercury Insurance was run by aliens from the planet Mercury. And I'm always on a quest to find aliens like your brother Howard was.
Right.
And I finally find one. I corner one in a barn, and it's a armadillo.
Really?
Yeah, isn't that pretty funny?
That is pretty funny. Yeah.
It is very, very funny. And that's how I say, "That's an armadillo." And I walk out, So it's pretty funny. It's the same punchline as your brother's story. That must be incredible. Growing up with 10 kids in the Midwest, harsh winters. This is the 1960s and 1970s, I presume.
Nope, 1950s and 60s.
In the 50s and 60s. Okay, you look younger than your age, which is a good thing. So life was kind of hard also back then. It's wonderful and it's simple, and we don't have distractions like this,
Right.
But tell me a little bit more about life in the Midwest. It's also great that you guys are all still close and still friends after all these years.
Oh yeah, we are. Actually, many of the siblings still live there in Indiana. But every year, all 10 of us get together for a reunion.
Nice.
And once a week, my 4 sisters get together for what they call the sister club. And the brothers and I, and actually one sister, we have a fantasy baseball league. So we all are constantly in touch. But getting back to the question about what life was like, well, if you're 10 years old, you don't know any other form of life.
Exactly.
I will tell you a story that's true. And I laugh about it today, but that's the way life was. So once a year, my dad would buy some clothes for school. This was usually happening in August.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd buy clothes and he'd buy shoes. But he didn't want to take us all to the store. So we, one by one, would climb on top of the kitchen table. My mom would outline our feet with a pencil. And my dad would take these pieces of paper into the store and buy our shoes. Amazing. That's how we got our shoes. I mean, it's a simple thing, but life was like that.
Well, it's very, very practical also,
Oh, yeah. But we all had chores to do. We all had to take care of the trash or the dishes or whatever it was, the yard. We each had an assignment, but it was just a good life.
What kind of work did your dad do to support 10 children?
Well, he worked for his dad, by the way, but it was an electrical contracting company. And my dad was the treasurer and then later the vice president of the company.
Gotcha.
And he did that. Um, it wasn't like millionaires, but it was a
Right.
business, was somewhat successful
Yeah.
in central Indiana. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And when I came out of high school, 1962, there was no money for me to go off to college.
Right.
So I had been a stringer for the three Indianapolis newspapers, the Times, the News, and the Star. And I would call in all the Carmel games, football, basketball, whatever. And but I went looking in the summer of '62 for a job and was having no luck finding one. And I happened to get a call from the sports editor for the Indianapolis Times. And he said, Larry, when you go off to college, I want to know what college you go to so you can be a stringer there. And I said, well, I'm not going to be going to college. I don't have the money. He said, you're not going to college? Why don't you come work for me? So from that, I got a job in the sports department at the Indianapolis Times. And that was pretty cool. I mean, that was really cool. He was able to bring me in and let me do that. There were times I had to work part-time as a copy boy. But mostly I worked in the sports department. And then a couple years later, I decided I wanted to write about politics. We can talk about that if you want to. But anyway, I decided I wanted to write politics. And this city editor moved me over to the city desk and I started covering politics.
That's really amazing. That's a great story because I probably more than most people know how difficult it is to advance in journalism and how, almost elitist it is. Like, well, you have to work here before you can work there and you have to do this, particularly in the era when you were doing it, when journalism was held to very high levels and high standards and high esteem. To start out working at the Indianapolis Times is quite incredible.
Right. Sadly, the Times folded up in the spring of the fall of '62, but the Times actually made sure that everybody on the Times had a job before they folded up completely. Wow. And they got me a job in Kokomo as a political writer. I later moved to Bloomington, where I worked full-time as a student, as a journalist for the Bloomington papers, and then later also full-time as a student. So I was working about 80 hours a week.
Wow.
Thereabouts. But it was great. I mean, I loved it. And you're a journalist, so one of the good things about being a journalist is you learn stuff every day.
Exactly. Your whole life is a learning experience. You've got a front seat to history in the making.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and I actually wrote a book about the 1960s and my journalism career. I think the 1960s are among the most interesting decades of my life. And I wrote a book that really talks about my journalism career, but also about the 1960s.
Yeah, well, a lot happened in the 60s. You had two Kennedys killed, Martin Luther King killed, Vietnam War.
Yep, and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah,
and the Civil Rights Movement and all that stuff, and actually the Barry Goldwater movement, and then later Richard Nixon and the Vietnam War. Yeah, all that stuff. So it was really great. It was an interesting decade.
Exactly. I used to be basically a copy boy at CBS. I started out as an intern working in college like you did. So I was doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week as well. And we used to have to rip from the teletype machines, the old the AP machines and the Reuters machines. And I used to go around and scoop it up and roll it up. And sometimes I would just throw it away. Because the producers would be so mad that I didn't rip it in time, because if I came in with a stack that was too thick, to avoid getting in trouble, I'd scoop up the big stuff, throw it away, let it run a few minutes, and just give them a small rip. So
that's pretty funny.
It was pretty funny. Yeah, exactly. I was laughing through life as well. I was quite a clown back then too. In the 1980s at the CBS newsroom, it was a good time.
Those old machines. When I was a copy boy, I was also working in the sports department. I was the head copy boy because they wanted me to do everything. So one year in May, the Kentucky Derby was run, and they had a picture that came across. Do you remember the old thermal fax picture machine? Okay,
you'd have a stack of all the pictures that would come across the wire as well, right?
Right. I had to take those off And what you did with those, for a newspaper at least, is you take the piece of paper off, which was very thin,
Mhm.
and I would take it into the morgue library,
Yep.
and I would iron on a piece of paper that had a sticky back to it. And that particular day, when I was ironing it on, the iron was too hot, and I destroyed that picture.
Wow.
I thought for sure that was the end of my career, but we were able to get another picture sent from AP or for UPI. But anyway, that was a scary moment.
Yeah. And things were different. Like, we had couriers back then to drive things back and forth. There wasn't any email, like somebody could just email you another picture
Right.
of, the Kentucky Derby winner. If you
Right.
didn't have that picture, you were out of luck.
You're out of luck. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway,
What do you make of what's happened to journalism over I would say the last 30 years, where it's all opinion and it's all, partisan and it's all dividing people. And there's more, people talking out of the side of their mouth rather than giving you the facts.
I could not agree more. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I went into political writing was I wanted to show that you could be unbiased in reporting. Back in the 60s, during the 64 campaign and the 68 campaign, there were a lot of people charging that papers were biased, not like you have today, but
Right.
they were considered biased. So my view was you can be a good reporter and get information out there without taking a viewpoint. And I had his Republican friends, I had Democratic friends. I got along with all the party leaders, most of not every candidate, but most of the candidates, because I wasn't trying to tell people what to think, what to
Right.
do.
Right.
And what's happened today is it's really very sad.
It is because the journalists today pretend they know the answer. There is no
Right.
one answer. There's what
Right.
he said and she said, and it's our job to present what President Trump is saying, what President Biden is saying, or candidate, whatever it is, instead of
Right.
saying, well, what he said isn't true, it's a lie, or what
Right.
that's not our job to label it.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really am very sad about that, but I don't think there's anything that I can do at this point in my life. I wish I could,
Yeah.
but there's nothing that I can do at this point in my life that would change that.
Right. Other than careful of what you consume. I feel like every time I put on a show, I'm voting for it, yay or nay. So I'm careful what I put on.
Well, I actually do try to watch different news programs on the TV.
Yeah.
I only read now one paper. I used to read 3 or 4 papers a day, but don't have the time.
Yeah.
But I do watch 2 or 3, 4. Most of them have a liberal lean because
Right.
work stuff and PBS, and I don't watch places of the cables like Fox and stuff like that. I just don't watch them. But you can clearly see the bias in what I do see. But if you watch 2 or 3 or 4 of them and you have a pretty good understanding of current events, you can sort of sort out what really is happening.
Exactly. If you listen to the sound bites more than the reporter wrapping around them, you can get a handle for what's happening. And that is the good thing about the information age. We have so many sources of information and so much raw data that's available to us. So if we want to, we can watch all of President Biden's news conference, not what's cherry picked, or all of President Trump's news conference, not what's cherry picked. So it's the best of times and the worst of times.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but while I was a journalist, I was covering presidential politics. I actually interviewed Richard Nixon twice.
Wow.
I had dinner with George McGovern once, and I covered Bobby Kennedy when he came to Indiana. I didn't really interview him personally, but I was among the press that followed him around. This was a month before he was assassinated,
right?
Because he was running for the presidency against Hubert Humphrey. By that time, Johnson had stepped out of the race.
Yeah,
but that was
it was an amazing time. My family was very politically active, so we were around at that time also. My family used to campaign for Nixon and Goldwater before that. But they made an exception when it came to Bobby Kennedy, because he's Irish Catholic, like we're Irish Catholic.
Right.
They made an exception. They campaigned for Kennedy.
Right.
Yeah.
So, by the way, speaking of Richard Nixon, so like the first time I interviewed him was in 1966, and he was actually campaigning for a bunch of congressional candidates in Indiana. And I happened to be at a speech where he gave, and I was on stage with him for about 10 minutes. And I asked him a number of questions. But one of the questions, of course, I'm a journalist, are you running for president in 1968? And he said, no. And I knew that was a lie. I mean, I knew
Right.
that, but that really wasn't something. So when I reported on the interview, I did not say he lied to me, because
Right.
he was just out there to campaign for these candidates. Uh,
Exactly.
so anyway,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, it'd be like, they'd make a big thing about it that he
right,
lied to me, looked at me in the face. No, he didn't lie. At this point in time, he has no intention of running or whatever it
right,
is,
right.
And he
Yeah,
wasn't going to make the announcement to you at that moment, at least, right? Yeah.
that's exactly right. And
Yeah.
one last thing about Nixon.
Sure.
So he cost me a job, but it wasn't really his fault. So I worked for this paper. It was a relatively new newspaper in Bloomington, Indiana, and the owner was a really big time Republican, and I was basically a Republican and supporter of Nixon, and I was the political writer, and he said, the owner of the paper, there will be nothing negative about Richard Nixon in our
Mhm.
newspaper. And I said, as a political reporter, I can't accept that. I tried to talk them out of it. They would not do it. So I left. I just quit the job. And within a week or two, I had a job as a reporter for the other Bloomington newspaper. But there was a case where I felt like this is important enough to me that I have to, stand up for my principles.
Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, that's just
That's good you did that. And there's only a handful of times in your career where you're tested like that. We talked about the small decision versus the big decision.
right,
That's a big, bold decision to say to your boss, no, I'm going to tell it as it is or
right,
tell it as I see it, as opposed to say what you want me to say. And I think that's very bold and very courageous.
right. So anyway,
Yeah, it's
uh,
funny. I was faced with a similar circumstances. Do you remember Richard Jewell, the man who was accused of being the bomber at the '96 Olympics?
I do. Yeah,
So my news director came to me and said, "Okay, Dal has developed information that Richard Jewell is going to be arrested by the FBI within the next number of days. We want you to just go in front of Jewell's house and report that tonight." I said, "Well, who are Dale's sources?" It like Dale has it nailed down, but he can't reveal the sources. I said, you know what? Let Dale do the report then. And
yeah.
I didn't do the report. I was one of the few reporters in Atlanta not to libel Richard Jewell. Everybody
Right,
got sued, and he
good,
collected from everybody, even though they destroyed his life in the interim.
right.
But that was a
Good for you.
similar type of thing. It feels
Right.
great to take a stand for journalism. I think too few people do it nowadays.
I do too. Yeah. So anyway,
Are you
well,
working
anyway,
on any other writings right now?
well, I'm doing two other books. I'm not sure which one I'll finish first. I'm working on a western. It's about a man who this was when the West was really young,
Mhm.
and he is really tough and sometimes does stuff that you would not approve of, but he
Mhm.
has to do it to survive. And he's able to forge a ranch for himself, and then eventually a town, small town, and then little bit bigger town. And as that town grows, people from the east move into that town, and suddenly his approach to life, that rough, tough approach, is no longer accepted, and he's an outcast.
Wow.
Anyway, I've got the basic story down, and I've got a lot of it written, but not completely written. So I've been working on that, but I sort of put it aside for a while because I have three grandkids,
Mhm.
and over the years I picked up, because I did a lot of speeches when I worked at the government explaining economic information. So I have a lot of little stories, etc., that I've developed over the years, and I wanted to do a book of humorous short stories that had points to them, and give that to my grandkids. So I've been working a little bit on that as well.
Nice, nice. I love the idea for both the books. I particularly love the Western. I'm a big fan of Westerns. I traveled across country last year, stopped by John Wayne's birthplace, Winterset, Iowa, which was awesome. And if you've never been, you need to go to Cody, Wyoming, which is
I've
an
been
old
there.
West town. Have you ever been out there?
Yeah, I've been out there. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
I was
great,
in
right?
Cody, Wyoming. Went to a rodeo there. It was actually there was a ranch, a horse ranch, where my brother and I stayed for about a week while we went into Yellowstone,
Yep.
which is not all that far from there. But we went to Cody several times. That's a great little town.
It's a great town, and you feel like the old West is still alive there. Lots of guys wearing cowboy hats and cowboy boots, and no, not too many horses, more pickup trucks, but
Right.
there still is the rodeo and all
There
that.
is the rodeo. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Wild Bill Hickok's spirit is still alive and all that. So it's a
Right.
great place. So
It
you're a
is.
busy man. I'm glad you've become such a prolific writer, and you've been able to take, your skills that you honed as a young man and implement them, in midlife and later on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I love it. I still to this day love learning stuff. There's some courses called Great Courses. They're college classes. Every
Mhm.
single night I watch some of that on video. I just the more I learn, the happier I am. And by
Yeah.
the way, that's also where you get a lot of your story ideas. If you're watching stuff that's real, and you can look at that and say, "Oh, that's really interesting. What if? What if?" And that's how
Exactly.
I get a lot of my stories.
Exactly. Is there any movies that have influenced you that you really like that kind of influence your style, particularly with this book, Invisible Influence?
Um, I I haven't seen very many movies recently. COVID sort of kept me out of the theater. I've seen some. Um, I can't really think of a movie that influenced me for this particular book,
Mm,
but I do like mysteries
yeah,
and suspense thrillers. Some of the Harrison Ford movies were pretty darn good, I think.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
but anyway, no, I can't think of a
I
movie.
I almost feel like the Spencer Graves could have been played by Cary Grant at one point.
Could have been played by Cary Grant. Or one thing that crosses my mind is Jack Lemmon would be good
Oh
because,
yeah, well he would bring a whole comedic touch to it as well.
well, he could, but he can also be very serious. And the thing is, he can be very vulnerable as a character,
Yeah,
and then stand up when he is committed, and he can do that. Now, he's not a superhero kind of guy, obviously,
right,
and there are probably other guys like maybe Tom Hanks,
right,
Michael Stewart. I don't think that Spencer Graves would be Paul Newman. I just can't imagine Paul Newman being vulnerable enough
right.
to make those decisions early in the story.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What brought you to Maryland? What took you out of Indiana?
Well, I spent 9 years as a journalist, and then I was ready to enter the workforce. Um, and I had been writing about politics for over 6 years. And I decided maybe I should say, so when I went to Indiana University,
Hmm.
I was advised wisely, don't don't major in journalism. You've been a journalist,
Right.
major in something that you want to write about. So I thought about political science, but 90% of all politics is economics.
Hmm.
And I decided to major in economics. So when I came out of Indiana University, I decided, it'd be maybe I could go out to Washington, straighten those guys out. No, I didn't say that, but maybe I could go out and work for the government and actually help provide a better economic policy. I never got into the policy side of it. Not that I'm sorry about that. That's all
Right.
political. But I did work for agencies that provided all the information that policymakers
Mm.
used. And I felt that, and by the way, my job for most of my career at BEA was, excuse me, was a media contact person. If a reporter like you had a
Yep.
question about GDP or some other aspect of the economy, you'd call me. I would explain it to you, help you understand it, and help you do the right story.
Yeah.
So that was my job, and it was a great career. I loved it. I
Yeah.
did
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it kind of kept your foot in journalism because you were dealing with the press all the time
all the time, right?
and
And I
also
loved
dealing with
the
government. It kind of brought together a lot of your different passions.
right.
When did you pick up the pen again and start writing again? What was the first novel you wrote after your
Well, the one
during,
that's
of
your one
course,
you're
your
talking
career?
about. Invisible Influence is the first one I finished as a
Okay.
novel. I have a collection of short stories. I did that one first, by the way. It's called Sons, Hoosier Hysteria, and Other Stories, collection of 8 short stories. Some are humorous, some are more serious.
Mhm.
And then I did the autobiography, Laughing Through Life, and then I did The Invisible Influence. Well, I've also written a book of poetry, which is not very good. I'm not a poet, but it was they're my thoughts over the years. I some love poetry, some cowboy poetry. By the way, I love
Mhm.
cowboy poetry. I'm a big Robert Service fan, the guy who went to Alaska at the end of the 19th century, and and I have a story about, a book about the 1960s. I mentioned that to you. And I
Mhm.
also have a family history that goes back to 1500.
Wow,
So,
that's wonderful. So you,
yeah.
you wrote a family history, like, or you did like your DNA kind of thing?
Yeah, I did. It was, I didn't do all the research. I got research from some other family members, but I took it back and I tried to put the flesh on the bones. You would do some genealogy and you have a
Right.
name and you'd have a date, but I would go back and see what was happening in that community at that time and write that out. So that made it a little more interesting. As I always tell people, that the most interesting part is not what his name was, but why did he go to jail? So
Exactly, exactly. Fun stuff. Doing your family history is really enlightening. I was able to trace my family's, journey through America and from Ireland and parts from Italy, and it was fun stuff for sure. And not to be a plug, but ancestry.com was a big help because it
oh yeah,
gives you all
absolutely.
the blanks to fill in, and yeah, and took some trips to the places where they lived.
Oh,
But
you
Larry,
did
you've
that.
done a great job on this book. It is called Invisible Influence. It's a story of Spencer Graves, an ordinary man who is in extraordinary circumstances when his world is turned upside down after he has a lapse of judgment, perhaps, and has an affair in Paris. Well, that lands him into a web of international intrigue and perhaps domestic demise. You'll have to read the book to find out more, and it is highly recommended. Larry, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.